spiritual awakening for me was growing up. I had a pretty tough childhood, and the question of why is this happening to me? Why am I being treated this way? Why am I being XYZ, whatever, fill in the blank. I was thinking it, and in school I always wondered why I really couldn't fit in. It's not that I couldn't fit in; it was that I felt like out of place. Like while people wanted to go party and drink and do drugs and all this other stuff, um, I felt like I didn't belong in that environment. Um, it almost seemed to me like I was being held back by that, because superficially I wanted to join them and I wanted to fit in, but at the same time, something within me was was not wanting to. I want to talk about what I've discovered thus far, but it's at birth we have just pure consciousness, this pure um, beingness in which the thought of I am, or the presence of I am or I exist, is just spontaneously manifests. And this manifestation needs a vessel to express and to experience. And that vessel is, of course, the body, the human mind. And it begins to experience things, and it begins to make connections to the world, and then one begins to identify with the body. So now we are no longer just I am. Now I am the body, and sooner or later we're taught, these are my toys. These toys belong to me, and I am Leonardo, and this is my mom, and therefore, separate. There's this sense of separateness, and I am Leonardo, I am Mexican, I am American now, and so on and so forth. And then we go from I am to I am the body. Something else is. We develop an identity that says I am this body, I am Leonardo, I am this XYZ. On top of that, we begin to identify with the objects in our environment around us. So now I'm not only my body, but I am my belongings, my possessions, my feelings, my experiences, my gifts, my talents, my skills, all that stuff I become. And therefore, if somebody outside of me is looking at me and then says you're stupid, or you don't have the talent, you don't have the skills necessary, they're offending this part of me. But because I identify with that, the entire structure is jeopardized, and now I feel a sense of defense arising within me that tells me I need to defend who I am. But that insult is superficial. It's only insulting the skill, or the false identity, if you will. When we develop that I am the body, the I amness, the being, sort of goes into some form of hypnosis, if you will, in which it no longer believes that it's just expansive, it's just universal intelligence, it's universal consciousness. It stops being one with all, and it creates this false sense of separateness, because obviously I am the body. I feel, I see, I can hear, I can taste, and because that is a real sensation, therefore the body must be real, and that is my reality. And so we develop all these false identities and false superficial identities, and then conflict arises because I know what I know and you disagree with what I am, and therefore conflict is created, and now I'm confused. Who am I really? So that sense of not wanting to partake in these events and partying and clubbing and all this other stuff was the true I am that saw through the superficiality of wanting to attain things to be happy, and wanting to um, accumulate knowledge and accumulate all these experiences in order to feel alive and feel some form of some sense of aliveness, if you will. But into my spiritual awakening, I I grew up Catholic, and the Catholic Church, for whatever reason, didn't feel right within me. And I was playing guitar one day at church, and I played a solo that the priest didn't like, and he came up to me and he told me that if I ever played a solo like that ever again, he'd kick me out. And so immediately after that, he offended some form of self, and I left the church and completely turned my back on God. And soon after that, I was agnostic, so I was holding on to the idea of God, but not holding on to a particular God, if you will. I soon became an atheist, and I turned my back on God completely. And I said, you know what? Through science, I'm going to prove that all religion is is negative, and there is no God at all. He doesn't exist. And from that, I started to look into every single religion, finding, the contradictions, the inconsistencies, the the just the things that were violent, that I didn't agree with, that couldn't possibly be that feeling that I had deep within my being. And the only problem is that I was still trying to accumulate knowledge. I was still trying to accumulate concepts and ideas, and all this other stuff. And um, I kept on looking at all these different religions, and the only one that I could not debunk was the only one that doesn't consider itself to be a religion, which is Buddhism. And because the teachings of the Buddha have absolutely nothing to do with God. As a matter of fact, the Buddha himself was Brahmin of the Hindu religion, and everything he taught had absolutely nothing to do with God. His concepts were strictly just and specifically geared towards the removal of all suffering, and overcoming our suffering, understanding, not really overcoming, not suppressing, because then that implies control and all that other stuff. But we'll go into that later. But really, just being aware, being mindful, and understanding how fear arises, and understanding how our suffering arises, and what Christians believe to be sin, how it arises, and how we fall into this trap called sin. So in not being able to crack the code, I guess, of Buddhism and try to debunk that, it started making sense because I started also studying quantum physics, and quantum physics is the study of particles at the very subatomic level, and how they react when there's an observer. That they react as wave particles when nothing is observing it, but when there's somebody watching or an observer, they act as molecules again, so as solid patterns. And Buddhism went into what we're now beginning to discover in quantum physics. And the question arose as to how the Buddha even knew about things like emptiness and stillness and entanglement, without having to study subatomic particles. And it's just this silence of the mind and all this other stuff. And being skeptical about it, being an atheist, I was just like, yeah, right, whatever. And I started taking up meditation just to test it out and debunk it.